I'm Dr. Lena Popovic, and after 30 plus years in medical practice, I realise there's a lot missing from modern medicine. Education is more powerful than medication, and our decisions have more impact than our DNA. Today's health headline is, "Sitting is the new smoking." I know we usually start with a brain booster, but for today's brain booster to make sense, we have to dive into the health headline first. And it's quite likely that this is not the first time you've heard the statement that sitting is the new smoking. But have you stopped to reflect on what it actually means? Or more appropriately, stood up to what it means? Or do you think it doesn't apply to you because you go to the gym every day? Well, think about this. Imagine you own a sleek, smooth-running car with a powerful engine, beautifully polished body, and not a scratch on its shiny metallic coat. And every morning, you take it on a short spin around the block. But then for the rest of the day, the car just sits in your garage, day after day. Eventually, what happens? The tyres develop flat spots, the battery weakens, and parts begin to seize. Not because it wasn't driven at all, but because your car wasn't driven enough and it sat in the garage for too many hours a day. Our bodies work like that car. So, how many hours did you spend sitting yesterday? Think about it. In the car, at your desk, on the sofa, watching TV or Netflix, at the dinner table, in bed scrolling on your phone. For a lot of people, when you add up the hours, even if they go to the gym or go for a run or take an hour-long walk every day, the time they spend sitting is shockingly high. Sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day. And here's the most alarming piece of news. People who sit for more than 11 hours a day have a 40% increased risk of early death from heart disease, stroke, cancer, complications of type 2 diabetes, and dementia compared with people who sit for less than 4 hours a day. Meanwhile, people who sit for more than 8 hours a day have a 15% increased risk of early death. 11 hours equates to a 40% increased risk of early death. 8 hours equals 15% increased risk of early death. So there's a dose-dependent effect. And people who sit for more than 8 hours a day have health risks comparable to those who smoke a packet of cigarettes every day, especially for cardiovascular disease. That's shocking. Who would have thought that sitting really is the new smoking, literally, not just figuratively? And just as exercise doesn't counteract the harms of smoking, exercise doesn't counteract all the harms of sitting. Don't get me wrong, exercise is absolutely essential for a healthy brain and a healthy body. And someone who sits a lot and exercises is definitely healthier than someone who sits a lot and doesn't exercise. But sitting is an independent risk factor for physical and mental decline. So the worst case scenario is sitting for hours every day and also not doing any exercise. The best case scenario is sitting for less than 4 hours a day, breaking up the sitting time with 2 minutes of movement every 20 to 30 minutes, and doing at least half an hour of moderate to vigorous physical exercise, MVPA, every day. This routine will more than halve your lifetime risk of getting dementia. And I'm guessing that most people listening to this podcast fall somewhere in between. You probably sit for more than 4 hours a day because of your work or because you've never thought about prolonged sitting as being a health hazard, and you do 30 to 60 minutes of moderate intensity exercise several times a week. So let me give you a rhyme to remember. You know I love rhymes and I love acronyms and I love alliteration. So Today you're getting a rhyme. The more you sit, the more you quit your health and wit bit by bit. And it's why the World Health Organization states that sitting is the new smoking. When we compare sitting and smoking, the magnitude of the harm to our health and the slow, invisible nature of the damage are very similar. Let's explore why, because I think unless I personally really know why I should be doing something, especially something that's going to be perhaps a bit annoying and means I have to start a new habit, I really want to know why. And in the show notes, I'll include the research papers that explain the why, the sitting studies, all in detail. Firstly, when we sit for prolonged periods, the metabolic activity in our cells gets dialed right down. What does metabolic activity mean? Think of your cells as tiny living engines inside your body. And metabolic activity is simply the work these engines do to keep you alive and functioning. It includes all the major and minor chemical jobs happening inside your cells. So, for example, breaking down fats and sugars, turning food into energy, building and repairing tissues, clearing out waste products, and just keeping your organs running smoothly. Just like a car engine needs fuel and oxygen to run, your cells need nutrients and oxygen to carry out these tasks. And just like a car engine can idle or rev, your cell's metabolic activity can be low or high depending on what you're doing. And when you stand up, walk, or use your muscles, your cells rev up. They burn more energy. They process sugars and fats more quickly. They keep your blood biochemistry in a healthy range. So, movement tells your cells, wake up. We need energy. We need action. In contrast, when you sit still for too long, your cells shift into a low power, idle mode. They stop burning significant amounts of energy. Sugar and fat build up in your bloodstream. Important enzymes, like the ones that help break down fats, turn off, and your metabolism slows to a crawl. Even if you feel mentally alert, which most people don't when they're sitting for a long time, your cells think nothing is happening and they go quiet. And that low metabolic activity is one major reason that sitting for long periods can affect blood sugar, fat levels, and long-term health. In one sentence, metabolic activity is the buzz of life inside your cells, and movement keeps that buzz switched on. Specifically in relation to our muscles, when you sit for more than a few hours, the electrical activity in your biggest muscles, your quadriceps and your glutes, your backside muscles, nearly flatlines. So thighs and bum muscles turn off. This leads to a steep drop in enzymes responsible for breaking down fats, such as lipoprotein lipase. Also, blood sugar regulation worsens because your muscles aren't helping absorb glucose. Professor David Dunstan and his team at the Baker Institute in Melbourne, they're world leaders in the research on sitting, they've shown that even just 2 hours of uninterrupted sitting can significantly increase blood glucose and insulin levels after eating. So that's just one of the mechanisms by which sitting contributes to brain fog. Sitting contributes to mental and physical fatigue, and sitting contributes to type 2 diabetes. The second thing that happens when we sit for hours on end is that blood flow stagnates. When your knees are bent and your muscles aren't working, circulation slows down, especially in the legs, and that can lead to stiffer arteries, higher blood pressure, increased likelihood of clot formation, and varicose veins. And that all adds up to a high risk of heart attack, stroke, and dementia. Thirdly, prolonged sitting causes postural pressure to build up. Why are we seeing an epidemic of back pain? Sitting increases the load on our spine, neck, and hips, and over time, this contributes to reduced flexibility, muscular imbalances, and backache. And finally, sitting means less stimulation to our brain. Less movement equals less blood flow to your brain. And studies using brain imaging have shown that even just a bit of movement boosts focus, boosts concentration, mood, cognitive performance. So if you want to increase your productivity, if you want to think better, learn better, create better, relate better, get up out of your chair every 20 to 30 minutes and move around for 2 minutes. Then, when you get back to work, you'll find you work better. If you're an employer or team leader, set up a system that makes it easy for your entire workforce to stand up every half hour so it becomes something that everyone just does. You could have a bell that goes off every hour and every half hour, and everyone knows it's time to get up, stretch, move, do whatever they like. The critical point is to get some action happening in our muscles, because standing still for prolonged periods is also a health hazard. It's not just sitting still, standing still as well. So basically, breaking up sitting time with any sort of movement needs to be part of workplace culture and recognised as a really simple but incredibly powerful way of not only enhancing our health, but also our effectiveness, efficiency, and even job satisfaction. And it goes without saying that moving more needs to be part of school culture, students and teachers alike. Not to mention that prolonged sitting makes life harder for people with ADHD, while standing up every half hour can improve symptoms of ADHD. But this is where I can feel people getting into a panic. Because who has time to stand up 2 or 3 times an hour? This is where it becomes a good news story. You don't have to do sprints across the room every 20 minutes. All you need to do to counteract the harms of prolonged sitting is to stand up every 20 to 30 minutes and do 2 to 3 minutes of any kind of light activity. By all means, sprint around the block if you want, but even light, low-intensity movement, stretching, just, twirling your ankles will meaningfully improve every aspect of your physical and mental health. Now, all the lawyers and accountants out there are probably breaking into a cold sweat because every 6 minutes is a billable unit, and that means losing a billable unit every hour. No, it doesn't. Firstly, you'll more than make up for the lost 6 minutes every hour by getting more done in 54 minutes than you would have done in 60 minutes when you just sat the whole time. And secondly, standing up doesn't mean being idle. You can still pace and think and read or talk on the phone. That's why they're called mobile phones. In terms of improving our health, a standout example, pun intended, standout example, is David Dunstan's study published in Diabetes Care in 2012. Participants in the study sat for long periods, but every 20 minutes they were prompted to get up and walk around lightly for just 2 minutes. The result? Their insulin levels, as well as their blood glucose, i.e. blood sugar levels after meals, were significantly better. That's like taking a diabetes medication. It's absolutely amazing that you can get such a dramatic effect just by standing up and shuffling around a bit. The participants in the study weren't hitting the gym every day. They were just getting up out of their chair. Minor movement, major improvement. Of course, major movement, even more improvement. Make that your new mantra. Now, something else I wanted to know was if there was a certain amount or type of exercise that could compensate for long bouts of sitting. And 2 years ago, in 2024, there was a study in the International Journal of Behavioural Nutrition and Physical Activity, what a mouthful, that asked the very same question. Researchers led by Emmanuel Stamatakis from the University of Sydney in Australia, go Australia, we're doing some really good research on sitting, So his team, Emmanuel Stamatakis, tracked more than 73,000 adults from the United Kingdom to assess how much physical activity was needed to attenuate the association between sedentary time and mortality. And this is what they found. Any movement is better than no movement. Even just a bit of shuffling around every day will keep you healthier than not moving at all. But to get specific, a person needs to do at least 163 minutes a day, that's more than 2.5 hours, of light physical activity, LVA, to make a dent on the harms of sitting the rest of the time. So it didn't undo all the damage, but it did help. Then you need to do at least 64 minutes a day, just over an hour, of moderate physical activity, MPA, to start to reverse some of the harms of prolonged sitting. It gets better though. You only need to do 30 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, MVPA, to start undoing the harms of sitting. That means you can just manage a conversation between heaving breaths, but you certainly couldn't sing along to a piece of music. And if you want to go full on with vigorous physical activity, VPA, that means you're so breathless you can't get a word out. You have to do at least 6 minutes before you collapse on the floor in an exhausted heap. Of course, you have to work your way up to this level of intensity. So don't start with 6 minutes of vigorous physical activity just because you're time poor. But the message is that there's something for everyone. No matter who you are, what your level of fitness, and how much time you have, you can offset some of the harms of prolonged sitting. Not all the harms, but at least some of the harms. Just like smokers who exercise are healthier than smokers who don't exercise. Exercise won't undo all the damaging effects of cigarettes, but exercise will strengthen a person's capacity to deal with cigarettes. But if you put it all together, if you do whichever form of exercise for however long works for you, and you break up your sitting time with 2 minutes of standing, shuffling around every 20 to 30 minutes, then you've nailed it. And today's brain booster is quit the sit and stand up for your brain. Our brain was made to move, not to engage in marathons of sloth-like sitting. And I get that the modern human is an expert at sitting because we've engineered movement out of our lives. From toddlers in booster seats to office workers in ergonomic thrones, we've turned sitting into a fine art. And as I've discussed, prolonged sitting is not just the enemy of productivity, it's a mainspring of metabolic mischief. And one of the biggest problems with sitting is that it doesn't spring to mind as an obvious health hazard, let alone a risk for developing dementia. Sitting feels like such a natural thing to do. It doesn't produce immediate pain or discomfort. And it's true that sitting in and of itself isn't automatically bad. It's the amount of sitting we do every day that causes problems in two ways. Firstly, the total time a person spends sitting every day, especially over the age of 60, even when they break it up with bouts of standing, and even if they flog themselves at the gym every day, hours and hours of sitting will increase the risk of developing dementia, and this is particularly the case as we get older. Secondly, if the sitting is prolonged, uninterrupted, and unbroken, it makes things even worse. So the recommendation that we stand up and move around every 20 to 30 minutes does mitigate many of the harms of hours of sitting, especially in young people, but it doesn't protect our brain entirely, especially when we get older. So we just have to get used to being less sedentary. We have to make regular half-hourly movement a habit as often as possible. Now, if you're at the opera or the ballet, I don't expect you to stand up and annoy the people sitting behind you. But do make sure you get up from your seat and walk around during intermission. And if you're at home watching TV, get up and move during the ad breaks. That's what the ads are for. Just walk around the room or do some squats or a few push-ups or hop on your exercise bike. Just get the blood flowing through your muscles however you can. It doesn't have to be intense. It just has to be some form of movement. Because the bottom line is that more time on your bottom means less volume in your brain. Seriously, long bouts of sitting downsize your brain. Every time you sit for more than 4 uninterrupted hours, your brain starts to shrink. And once a person reaches 10 hours of sitting, the risk of dementia really accelerates sharply. 12 hours of sitting, and you better start getting your affairs in order. In a study conducted by the Vanderbilt Memory and Alzheimer's Center in Nashville, Tennessee, love Nashville. It is such an exciting, fun, energetic, musical city. Anyway, 404 men and women aged over 60 with no diagnosis of dementia were asked to wear a device known as a triaxial accelerometer. Now, a triaxial accelerometer detects movement in 3 directions, hence the prefix tri. And it's particularly useful in this type of experiment because it can pick up both fast and slow movements, even a walking pace of less than 1 metre per second. And they wore this on their non-dominant wrist 24 hours a day for 10 consecutive days. At the start of the study, and every few years, up to 7 years later, they underwent a brain MRI scan to measure the volume of different regions of their brain, and they had comprehensive neuropsychological testing that assessed information processing speed, language skills, executive function, which is the ability to plan and problem solve. They had their visual spatial ability tested and also their episodic memory, which is the memory of personal experiences or events, such as what you ate for breakfast and where you went to school. This is in contrast to semantic memory, which is the memory of facts, figures, and general knowledge, like Canberra is the capital of Australia. So, both brain size and brain function were evaluated. The participants were also tested for the ApoE gene. Now, there are 3 versions of this gene. ApoE, they're just called, for random reasons, ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. And if you carry the ApoE4 gene, you have a high risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. It doesn't guarantee you'll get Alzheimer's, but it increases the likelihood. And researchers are constantly trying to find out what might mitigate an ApoE4 carrier's risk of Alzheimer's. I'll spend more time discussing the genetics of Alzheimer's in a future podcast. For now, let's look at the results of this study. Firstly, 1/3 of participants carried an ApoE4 gene, which put them at a high risk of Alzheimer's. Secondly, most participants, 87% of them, met the recommended guidelines of at least 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical exercise every week. The range was 30 to 90 minutes a day, which is very good in comparison to the US population as a whole. And, not surprisingly, the more moderate to vigorous physical activity a person did, which is abbreviated to MVPA, the more exercise they did, the less sedentary they tended to be for the rest of the day. However, even if they exercised for an hour a day, the more time they spent sitting, the faster their brain shrunk, the more their brain shrunk, especially in areas of the brain linked to Alzheimer's, such as the hippocampus, which is involved in memory, learning, and navigation, and the more they declined in their ability to name things and perform mentally challenging tasks. And in people with the ApoE4 gene, the decline was even quicker and greater. That's not to say the exercise didn't make any difference at all. It's just that exercise couldn't compensate for all the harms of prolonged sitting. We can't leave our brain in the care of our chair. Another study, published in the journal Alzheimer's Research and Therapy in 2020, found that when 70-plus-year-olds sat for 3 uninterrupted hours, their blood pressure went up, and there were changes in their blood vessels that made it harder for blood to circulate through their brain. If you want a fancy term for it, there was an increase in cerebrovascular resistance, which means it was harder for blood to deliver oxygen and nutrients to their brain. Not good. But if you're under the age of 45, a good news study published in the Journal of Science and Medicine in Sport in 2017 found that intermittent bouts of standing, cycling, or walking throughout a 6-hour period of seated work improved cognitive performance and accuracy compared to sitting for 6 hours without any standing breaks. So, your call to action is move to improve every aspect of your health, including your brain. Movement is an absolute must. Every time you talk on the phone, stand up and walk around for the duration of the conversation. Whenever you send a text message or scroll through social media, do it standing up. The bonus is that you'll waste less of your life engaged in mindless scrolling because it will mean having to get up. If you work from home, take out the recycling every time there's a few pieces of paper in the bin. Stand up and stretch different muscle groups for 2 minutes every 20 minutes. Stand on each leg for 1 minute at a time and practice your balance. Better balance means better brain function, which is something else I'll cover in another podcast. None of this is wasted time because you make up for it by being more productive in the long run. Get a stand-up desk. They don't have to be expensive. Or just put a pile of books on your desk and lift your computer onto them every half hour so that you can type while you shift your weight from one leg to the next. Actually, I've got a great idea. If you buy a copy of each of my 3 books and sit them on top of each other, they're the perfect height for you to rest your computer so you can keep typing while standing. Engage in more active leisure time pursuits. Play darts or quoits or do jigsaw puzzles while standing and moving around. Those old-fashioned games are really fun, and I have to thank my father for putting me onto them because I was constantly trying to get him to stand up and move, and he wouldn't do it without a good reason. So brainstorm ways to sit less and move more. So what's missing from modern medicine? What's missing from modern medicine is a public health campaign titled Beware the Chair, or Rise to the Occasion, or Stand to Attention, or Stand Up for Yourself, or The Grandstand. What's missing from modern medicine are posters with slogans encouraging movement. And these have to be in every doctor's waiting room, in every hospital corridor, in every retirement village and nursing home, in every school classroom, in every office, in every library, at every bus stop, on every bus, on highway billboards, anywhere a poster can fit. What's missing from modern medicine is doctors asking patients, how many hours a day do you typically sit? Has your doctor ever asked you that? Yet it's more important than measuring your blood cholesterol. Seriously, high levels of sitting are a bigger heart attack risk than high LDL cholesterol. I'm going to pause for a moment to let that sink in because it's really big news. We're obsessed with lowering cholesterol, yet we've got something far more effective at lowering heart attacks and we're ignoring it. Standing up saves more lives than taking statins. Statins being drugs that lower LDL cholesterol. So, what's missing from modern medicine is doctors prescribing movement as medicine. Doctors giving patients a handout with the thresholds I spoke about in health headlines. You need 6 minutes of vigorous physical activity, 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, 64 minutes of moderate physical activity, or 163 minutes of low-intensity physical activity. What's missing from modern medicine is doctors modelling standing up and moving every half an hour, and doctors being taught about the value of exercise snacks instead of low-calorie snacks. If you feel like a sugar hit, swap it for an exercise hit. Just 30 to 60 seconds of running as fast as you can on the spot, or up and down a flight of stairs, or hopping on an exercise bike. After 30 to 60 seconds of going as hard as you can, running or cycling or climbing stairs, your craving will pass. Movement is more effective than munching. But back to breaking up sitting time. In a trial done by the Baker IDI Heart and Diabetes Institute in Melbourne, office workers, i.e. people with desk jobs, who were overweight or obese, performed their usual occupational tasks for 8 hours a day under 2 conditions. Condition 1 was 5 days of sitting all day to do their work, which was how they ordinarily did it. Or condition 2 was 5 days of interchanging between a standing and seated work posture every 30 minutes using an electric height-adjustable workstation. So they didn't have to interrupt what they were doing, they just did it while standing up. On day 5 of both scenarios, the participants were asked to complete a questionnaire measuring fatigue, musculoskeletal discomfort, and work productivity. What was the result? Firstly, people's total fatigue score was much higher during the 5 days of sitting without standing. Secondly, lower back musculoskeletal discomfort was significantly reduced during the stand-sit condition compared with just sitting. And thirdly, there was a trend towards improved overall work productivity in favour of the stand-sit condition. I know I'm labouring the point about sitting being a health hazard, with study after study showing the same or very similar results, and I have listed them all in the show notes, but I feel the point needs to be laboured because it's being ignored. So I'll finish with just one more study because it yields useful information of a different nature. Now, in this case, researchers at Kansas State University in the US wanted to know what was a more effective way of taking breaks from sitting. Was it frequent short breaks or fewer longer breaks? Very interesting question. So they compared standing up for 1 or 2 minutes every half hour with standing and doing something mildly active for 15 minutes twice every workday. Were they equally effective, or was one regime better than the other? And the participants were inactive women in full-time sedentary jobs, and they were randomly assigned to one of the 2 groups for 8 weeks. The total amount of time the women were sedentary was then assessed at the start and the end of the study. And the researchers also measured fasting blood glucose and triglycerides. Triglycerides are a type of fat that is associated with an increased risk of heart disease, and they measured these blood levels before and after the study. Which protocol do you think led to less time sitting overall and better blood test results? Was it standing up and moving for 2 minutes every half hour, or standing up twice a day for 15 minutes of light exercise? It turns out that standing up for 2 minutes every half hour trumps standing up for 15 minutes twice a day. 2 minutes of standing every half an hour led to the women being less sedentary overall and lowered their fasting blood glucose and triglyceride levels. Bang, that's a big one. That's an important one. That is fantastic news for all of us. Here's another example of movement equating to taking prescription medications. So doctors need to seriously start prescribing it, or humorously start prescribing it. Let's think about what happens in aged care. Let's tackle aged care residences as well, because here sitting is really the major sport. If I were running a nursing home, here's what I'd do. A sound would go off every hour. Could be a piece of popular music, the call of a bird, the quack of a duck, the chime of a bell. And each sound would signify a different activity, which someone would announce over a PA. So let's say 10 a.m, you might have dance music, a waltz, jazz, a folk song, and everyone, staff and residents alike, would stop what they were doing, take someone by the hand and dance the appropriate dance for however many minutes the song lasted. Or improvise if you didn't know the dance. If a person was wheelchair bound, someone would move the wheelchair in time with the music and the patient would move however they were able. Then, at 11 a.m, a well-known song would play with a corresponding invitation to stand up and sing. There could even be a screen with scrolling lyrics for people to sing along like karaoke. At midday, there might be the sound of a sizzling steak and everyone would be asked to stand up and help set the table for lunch. Each person could just set, one fork or one spoon or one glass or plate or serviette. The idea is not for them to set the table, but to involve everyone standing up in some way. At 1 o'clock, there'd be the chirping of a bird, and everyone would have to go outside into the garden and walk around for 2 minutes to look for a bird. They might never find a bird, but that's not the point of the exercise. It's to get people up and moving after a meal to improve blood sugar regulation. At 2 o'clock, Jane Fonda music, and everyone would stand up and do a guided stretch or pair up with someone and share a story. At 3 o'clock, another sound would reverberate and another activity would be called for. The possibilities are endless, and not only would it improve people's health, it would build a sense of community, fun, laughter into everyone's day. And if someone is frail and unsteady on their feet, standing doesn't mean standing unsupported. People can lean, people can use rails, or just participate in seated stretches, toe taps, swaying, whatever they can do. And this would not be hard to implement. All aged care residences have an activities coordinator or a diversional therapist, so the hourly stand-along activities could just easily be part of their job description. And with aged care residences, I'm suggesting hourly rather than half-hourly because things tend to happen more slowly in aged care residences. So by the time the activity was over, it would be close to 20 minutes before everyone would have settled down again. And because going from zero movement to some movement brings the greatest benefits to a person's physical and mental health, the hourly stand-up routine would positively transform the health of aged care residents because many of them spend all day long doing nothing but sitting. Okay, what about an even greater challenge? The desk job domain. We could employ a similar concept. Every 30 minutes, a sound goes off and a voice suggests a booster break, an activity that has to be performed while standing and moving. And the employee can choose to follow the prompt or do their own thing as long as they stand up to do it. So, examples of booster breaks are stretching, walking outside for a minute, meditating or breath work while walking to the other side of the room and asking someone how they're doing and what challenges they've overcome that day. Could be running up a flight of stairs, balancing on one leg for 60 seconds, arm circles, squats, lunges, calf raises, push-ups, doing a desk dance, whatever that means to you. Or you could bring some heavy weights to your work and do some bicep curls or shoulder presses. There are so many ways to take a booster break. And once a day, for one of the breaks, someone's name could be randomly called out and they have to either tell a joke or give an impromptu motivational speech about the value of booster breaks while wandering around the room. The only reason this all sounds silly or weird is because we're not in the habit of doing it. But what's really weird is that we spend all day sitting. And by the way, yes, I stand up and move around at the end of every podcast recording to give myself a booster break. And if my podcast episodes are longer than 40 minutes, I pause the recording every 30 minutes for my booster break, even though you won't know it. And by the way, booster breaks, improving employee health one break at a time, is actually the title of a 2010 book and a must-read for every employer. After you've read the chapter Jack in the Box in my book, Can Adventure Prevent Dementia? The authors of Booster Breaks are Dr. Dr. Wendell Taylor and Karen Pepkin. And the goal of booster breaks is exactly what I've been talking about: to transform workplace culture so that management encourages people to take routine, health-enhancing breaks every workday. And the entire organisation, not just the individual, benefits because booster breaks improve physical and mental health, so people take less sick days, they help mitigate job stress, and they increase productivity. And the book even goes on to describe how booster breaks can lower healthcare costs, improve organisational morale, and have a positive ripple effect for society. And if everyone's taking booster breaks, no one feels like they're slacking off. And they soon see that it's the opposite of slacking off because they feel so much better. And today's weather report comes from Suan in Sawtell on the east coast of New South Wales, Australia.
Yeah, hi. Could you please tell me whether having varicose veins increases the risk of dementia?
I thought this question was particularly relevant to today's podcast because another health hazard of excessive sitting is an increased risk of developing varicose veins and DVT, deep vein thrombosis. And to make sure we're all on the same page, deep vein thrombosis, DVT, is a blood clot that forms in a deep vein, most often in a leg, which can cause swelling, pain or cramping, usually starting in the calf, tenderness, so it's going to hurt more when you press it, red or discoloured skin, and maybe a feeling of warmth in your leg. And what makes a DVT a medical emergency is that a clot can break off, travel through your bloodstream to your lungs, and cause a potentially life-threatening condition called a pulmonary embolism, PE. So that's another very good reason not to sit for prolonged periods. Now, most people are aware that standing for prolonged periods is also a risk factor for varicose veins and blood clots. So I'm not suggesting that we replace sitting all day with standing all day. Stand-up desks are not meant to be used for hours on end. The idea of them is to break up sitting time and allow you to shift your weight from one leg to the other or do some calf raises or stretches for a few minutes before sitting down again. So, back to Suan's question. What's the link between varicose veins and dementia? To answer that question, let's do a brief overview of varicose veins. The word varicose comes from the Latin term varus, which means bent or crooked. And varicose veins are blue, or some people might say they're dark purple, swollen, bulging, twisted veins that most commonly appear in the legs and feet. Now, normal veins contain one-way valves that prevent backflow and keep blood moving towards the heart. So in your legs, these valves are working against gravity, which is obviously pushing down. And if the valves weaken or get damaged, blood starts to flow downwards in the wrong direction and pool in the veins. In medical speak, this is known as venous insufficiency or venous reflux. And because this increases pressure in the vein, it causes stretching and weakening of the vein walls, which leads to the characteristic rope-like appearance of varicose veins. So, what causes the valves in a vein to weaken or fail to close properly? There is rarely one single cause of any illness or medical condition, and varicose veins are no exception. What we do know is that factors contributing to the development of varicose veins include, as you've heard ad infinitum today, uninterrupted sitting for hours on end, standing still for hours on end, and not exercising on a regular basis, i.e. at least 3 times a week. Because if you aren't moving your muscles, which is the case if you're sitting or standing still, you're inhibiting the natural pumping action that pushes blood back to the heart. So blood pools in the legs and increases pressure in the veins. 2 other big risk factors for varicose veins are smoking and carrying excess body fat. I don't like using BMI or body mass index as a measure of health, and I will explain why in future podcasts. But in the case of varicose veins, having a BMI of over 30 doubles the likelihood of varicose veins compared to someone with a BMI of less than 25. And to calculate your BMI, you divide your weight in kilograms by your height in meters squared. So if you weigh 100 kilograms and you're 2 meters tall, your BMI would be 100 divided by 2 squared. So 100 divided by 4, which is 25. So you're good. A lesser known risk factor for varicose veins is drinking alcohol, because over time, alcohol can increase blood pressure, weaken vein walls, and cause dehydration. Women over the age of 40 who have had multiple pregnancies are also at high risk of varicose veins, as are people who have had leg injuries or leg surgery, because both of these scenarios can weaken or damage your vein walls and valves. So, back to the original question, whether varicose veins increase the risk of dementia. Well, several studies have shown that people with varicose veins are more likely to get dementia than people without varicose veins, especially men who smoke and men who drink alcohol. And the more severe a person's varicose veins, the stronger the link to dementia, especially the two most common types of dementia, which are Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. But, interestingly, if a person gets the varicose veins treated, it brings their risk of vascular dementia, but not Alzheimer's dementia, back down. Why might there be a connection between varicose veins and dementia, like we're talking the two opposite ends of the body? Firstly, most of the risk factors for varicose veins are also risk factors for dementia. All of these things, being sedentary, smoking, carrying excess body fat, drinking alcohol, are risk factors for dementia. So it could just be that the same things that cause varicose veins also cause dementia. So it isn't the varicose veins per se that are the issue. However, the fact that the risk of vascular dementia goes down when varicose veins are treated suggests that there is something about varicose veins that affects brain health. What might that be? Varicose veins could be indicative of, and they could contribute to, poor circulation overall, which compromises brain health. And varicose veins could give rise to inflammation throughout the body and the brain, and inflammation is a significant driving factor in dementia. The bottom line is that everything is connected. What's good for the legs is good for the heart, is good for the brain, is good for everything. Please note that this podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and is not intended to provide specific guidance for any particular situation. The use of this information is at the viewer and listener's own risk and is not a substitute for consulting a healthcare provider.